Broadcasting from the campus of Lynn Benton Community College. We are the Mid-Valley STEM-CTE Hub. I'm your host, Casey, and this is Closing the Gap. Hello, everyone. I'm once again joined by West Albany High School student and friend of the show, Tori Thorp. Today, we are talking to Veronika Kivenson, a postdoctoral fellow in the microbiology department at Oregon State University. Veronika is making some meaningful scientific contributions in the areas of marine microbial ecology and the expansion of the genetic code in microbes that live in the human gut. Hi, Veronika. Thanks for speaking with us today.
Hello.
We're very interested in hearing your story, so let's get the show rolling. Take it away, Tori.
So how did you first become interested in marine science and biochemistry, specifically like your study of microbes? Did it evolve as you went through school, or did you always know that your current career was the end goal?
So when I started my undergraduate career, I wanted to study sociology and be a social worker. And so I took classes at a community college, like anthropology, sociology, and things like that. And then there was a science class that was supposed to be for like biology majors offered in the summer. So I took it partially to fulfill my science requirement, but the professor made it really interesting. And so I got like more and more excited about it. And I learned that there was like a study abroad class and fieldwork in Costa Rica that this professor was offering. And so I started just taking more and more science classes. And then I decided to do biology and eventually biochemistry. And then I realized scientists get to go on research vessels and like to Antarctica and in submarines and do all this exploration. And it was like a ongoing thing. It wasn't like a thing of the past where there were explorers or what have you. And so I decided I wanted to do some kind of environmental and marine work. And so I decided to major in marine science for my graduate studies. And I did get to go on a research vessel. So
yeah, that's awesome. So the interest in science fields didn't evolve until you were in college?
Correct. Yeah, I thought the classes would be too difficult, and I wasn't sure if I would do okay in those classes. I kind of avoided them. I was like, oh, those are the hard classes. I can't take those classes. And so I only tried it because of a requirement, and then it was not that much harder or it wasn't much harder or very different really from the other classes I was taking. And so then it started to seem like, oh, maybe this is an option. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I am smart enough to take these classes.
Yeah, that's really cool. And now you have a PhD in marine science. So look how far you've come.
Yeah, that still seems kind of weird to me. I'm like, yeah, I do, but it just seems weird because I really looked up to all these people who were just graduate students, let alone people who had finished graduate school. And then I did. And so it's kind of a surreal feeling.
Yeah. So what do you consider some of your greatest accomplishments in your career so far?
I think one of the things that really like turned things for me or like changed my attitude. So I was kind of insecure before grad school. I was insecure in grad school. And I had a project that sort of didn't make sense for a long time. And I just kept thinking about it. And it was my project for years. And it's this DDT dump site off the coast of California that I studied for my PhD. And I figured out what the sort of main findings were. And it's hard to describe that. I think there's a lot of detail and nuance there, but I figured out this key piece, and then I started collecting data, and all of it supported this. And it was this really new idea. And once I had that, I was just so excited. I was like, oh, I can come up with an idea and then look into it and collect data or look at data and then like create this like new piece of knowledge. And then we eventually we published this paper about it. And I think that just changed everything. I was like, oh, I could do this, not just, take the classes, but contribute to science in some kind of meaningful way.
Yeah, that's really exciting when you can like see your work in action, like it's in a paper and people can read it and like gather data from it.
Yeah, that was just like sort of changed everything for me. That's when I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Like this is really exciting and it seems important, I hope. And and so that's when I really decided I wanted to pursue a career in research, and that's what my goal would be.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you hope that you'll be able to accomplish in the future? Like, what do you see yourself doing?
So I guess I split it sort of in two pieces. One is like career-wise, like what's your title? And then the other one is like scientific questions wise, like what questions can you answer? How are you going to answer them? And so career-wise, I hope to stay in doing research and in academia if possible, because of the sort of freedom to pursue your ideas, as compared to industry, like working for a company that has a specific goal that's sort of predetermined. So I want to stay in research and continue to answer questions about various processes, chemical, biological, and what have you. And I think that evolves as it goes. So I don't want to say, oh, I want to discover this. I think I just want to discover, and look into things that are actually occurring, or like correctly describe new things that are happening or unknown things that are happening. And I don't know what those will be until I have that data. So I guess my goal is just to carry on with this sort of work and to have, I think, the privilege to get to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just continue going along with the scientific process until you find something. So what have been some of your biggest challenges as you've gone through school and then entered a career in the STEM fields? What have you run into that you had to overcome?
I think the biggest part was, I think perhaps maybe trusting myself that I'll like figure out how to do something. I sort of went into it very timid, you could say, and almost like asking permission. Sorry, this is the puppy. So I went into it very timidly, almost like asking permission, like, can I look at this data? Is it okay if I check this? Am I doing this the right way? Like, do I dare do this? And even if it's really minor, like I don't know what examples I could bring up, but then sort of becoming more confident and trusting myself that I'll figure out a way to do something. And then also interacting with the world around me and the institutions and the people and things like that, and sort of figuring out how to navigate that landscape, like what's expected and what's a reasonable approach, what is a mentor or an advisor, what's their role, what's my role, how do we communicate, and how do we get to our end goal of whatever research project is happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was publishing that paper and like seeing it in physical form, was that kind of one of the turning points where like you started getting more confident in yourself?
Yeah, I think that's when kind of everything changed. That was also the 6th year of my PhD, so it took some time. Yeah, I think because I guess writing a manuscript and then submitting it for publication, the manuscript, all the co-authors read it, then reviewers read it, the editor reads it, and everyone's sort of critiquing it or looking into ways, does this make sense? Is this logical? And so going through that process is challenging, but it's also very validating, because these people are essentially saying that everything that's here, I think, makes sense. And so to go through that process and then come out of it and have this paper is so exciting. And then sort of no one really knowing the story, not really paying attention to this project the entire time I was working on it, which was 6 years and maybe more now. And then it ends up being on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, this huge readership, and then getting into the New York Times and CBS and all this other stuff. And now it's in a book. And people are like, oh, I heard about this project, or I heard about this, DDT dump site. And I'm like, I studied that. Like, that was my, I live, breathe. I lived that, for all these years. It's just really, I don't know. It's really weird feeling, an interesting feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine how surreal it is to see your work in the front of like a national publication.
Yeah, I have a copy of it. I asked I talked to the reporter like a number of times, and she sent a copy and we were chatting about it. And she just did such an amazing job getting the science right, which is hard because communicating with scientists and then being very specific about, sorry. Should I start that over? Sorry.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
If you wanted to just maybe start on that like last sentence, or like maybe rephrase your thought, it just kind of, the dog's noise kind of overpowered your voice.
Yeah, he's ripping apart something. What was the last sentence I was saying, or what was the question? Sorry.
You're talking about how you were having a conversation with the reporter and she sent you the article.
So the DDT story, the barrel dump site story, appeared in the Los Angeles Times. And I spoke with the reporter like a number of times as that was coming together. And I was so impressed with how everything was so accurate. And there are always these little nuanced details. And it's very difficult to tell it, to talk about a topic like that. And so just reading that and seeing everything sort of come together was really exciting. And she spoke with a number of different people about why this story was sort of overlooked for so many years. And then talking to her afterwards, she received this huge public response, and people have been contacting her and my PhD advisor and me about this DDT dump site. And it's been interesting to see how people feel, compelled to care about this. And so that's been really rewarding.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'm going to switch the tone a little bit and talk about kind of the STEM fields and how gender plays a role in that. Do you think that women are viewed differently than men as a minority in STEM fields, or how do you think gender kind of affects that dynamic?
So I think a lot of people sort of think, oh, it's over, like everything's fine now. And, that's kind of an attitude that I've come across. And in a lot of instances, I won't really engage with people who sort of think that it's not an issue, who, kind of don't want to hear about it. But I think if you look at the literature, looking at the literature, people have written about this and scientists study this exact thing. And one of the papers that I think showed this very clearly described how two people, there were two resumes that were sent out for a job, a lab manager job. And one was Jennifer and the other was John. And they had the exact same credentials, the exact same experience. Everything was identical. The only difference was one was John and one was Jennifer. John received more job offers and John received more a higher pay level. And so despite having identical everything except the name, John fared better than Jennifer. And I think the study is very recent, like a couple, maybe 2 years or something like that. And so I think it's very much not a solved problem.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that it'll take over 200 years for like even the wage gap to be completely closed.
Yeah, people are like, oh, it's fixed. And my personal least favorite is that it's actually easier for women in STEM fields. And of course, I mean, people are going to think what they want to think, but if they want to just ignore the science behind it, I mean, I think that is a big part of the problem. And so I think it's far from fixed. Clearly, that is just the case. And it's not, it's not easier for women in STEM fields. And so, that is I think a very difficult piece of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it definitely affects the way that kind of careers and college opportunities are marketed to high school students or people that are going into college for something. What do you think can be done to like kind of spread the word to women about career options in STEM fields, specifically women that are starting an education in STEM fields or going into that?
I think that there are a number of things that could be done. I was really fortunate in that I transferred from a community college to Mount Holyoke College, which was I think the first of the 7 sister schools of the women's colleges. And I had a mentor there named that was Dr. Becky Packard, and she wrote a book called Successful STEM Strategies for Underrepresented Groups, something like that. And she talks about, what has been shown to be successful. And she was doing work at Mount Holyoke to help women who had transferred from community colleges. And I think that it's there's like sort of 2 pieces to it. One is like one-on-one internship, mentorship, training. And the other is sort of more group things, like giving a seminar, doing a talk, visiting a school, and sort of making it known that this is an option, and that going into STEM is an option, that people do. I visited the community college where I was a student, and the students there are like, oh, it's Dr. Veronika Kivenson, and they look at me and I'm like, don't look at me like that. I sat in that seat, I got like a 75 on that exam. I worked at Dunkin' Donuts, I took the bus, I fell asleep in class, I did my homework at the last minute. I was scared of taking genetics 2 because I heard the lab was too hard. And so like, don't look at me like that. Like if I could, I think that, and I hesitate to say if I could do this, you could do this, because I feel like I've had a lot of support that's not available to everyone. And so I feel like that's the key, and it's institutional and individual. Like I feel like both are necessary. And so part of the reason that I want to stay in academia is to like, my dream is to be a professor and to start my own lab and train students, and also have graduate students like visit community colleges or visit undergraduate institutions and talk to the people there so that they see that it's, that it's an option, and to offer them internships and to pay them for those internships, and sort of various pieces like that, I think are important.
Yeah, I think a lot of women think that there has to be like some special circumstances for them to go into that sort of field. Like they have to be some sort of prodigy or like really talented at it, and not just because they're interested in it.
I hate the myth of like the like lone male prodigy who discovers this or that. And it's just, I think that that's like the societal construct, but it's sort of inflicted on everyone. And I think unnecessarily, and I want to like peel that away and get rid of that. Like, no, here's the real story behind that. And I don't know, one thing I was reading about is like the Nobel Prizes, like all these men who receive the Nobel Prize, but how there's always a story behind that. And it's not necessarily the story that people hear. And it's a much more complicated story about who did what research was done, who discovered what. One of, there's a famous one with Rosalind Franklin and DNA. And I think about how many other women are like that, and people who, men stole credit from, that remain unknown and that we don't hear about. And I don't know, I think that it's just so prevalent. And so, I think that connecting with people is so important, and just sort of talking about all of this.
Yeah, I read a book about that as well, and it mentioned like Rosalind Franklin and everything. And it kind of made me realize like people say that women are getting more into STEM topics because like everything is kind of progressing, but women have always been in STEM topics. They've always been discovering things. They're just now demanding to be like credited for that and heard.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird. Like, I feel like the more I sort of look into it, the more the curtain sort of falls away. And I keep thinking, oh, okay, I see it now. And then the more I look, I'm like, no, there's more. There's even more. So I feel like I'm kind of still figuring it out as well, but definitely seeing that and you know, sort of looking at how people get credit and how people progress and how it feeds itself. So in my career path, and I guess generally for researchers, you know, there's so many places where this happens. One example is just having a female name can make it more difficult to publish in, you know, a prestigious journal, certain prestigious journals. And then if you don't publish there, it's more difficult to get funding. And if you don't get funding, then it's more difficult to have options in terms of what research you're doing to pursue your ideas. And so it's like this cycle that feeds on itself, a very negative cycle. And that is just so like complex and convoluted, and there's so many pieces to it. And so it's just such a joke when people are saying, oh, this is over, this is easier for women. And it's just, I don't know, that's just so ridiculous to me. I think that even looking into it, I only see the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that need to be picked apart and like really looked at to be able to fix the problems, because there's just so many pieces. I've actually really looked into the Mount Holyoke when I was kind of looking for colleges to apply to this year. So that's kind of interesting. Isn't it like all women's?
Yeah, I think so. It started as a women's college. Now it's like women's college, and also, you know, and also non-binary, trans, and they have a program for community college students to transfer in, which is what I did. And then non-traditional students, so students that are 24 and older. And it's called the Frances Perkins program. And it's and Frances Perkins, there's a lot of history there, why it's called the Frances Perkins program. I don't know, it's just an amazing place. It made a huge impact in my life. It's a wonderful community. For me also, it was almost free to go there. And now I think they did make it free for Frances Perkins scholars. I think it's like tuition free, and I forget what the residential part of it is, but basically like, they want to recruit students who are going to be, you know, competitive scholars, and that doesn't mean just people who are 18, you know. And so so they have this really excellent community, and I lived in a house and it was 12 students, all, you know, non-traditional students. And I was talking to one of them right before I talked to you, and she got into the PhD program at UC Davis, and she just she was awarded a fellowship. So she is, you know, starting this exciting, you know, graduate school journey. But we were next door neighbors at Mount Holyoke, and we're still friends. Like, I was there from 2011 to 2013, so like 10 years later. But yeah, I think it cost like, at the time for me, it was like $3,000 or $4,000, and they covered like 55,000. And I think now it's something like that, or it's just they cover all of it for students who qualify. And I don't remember what all the rules are. Oh, I should have read up about it. But yeah, I love Mount Holyoke. If you ever want to talk about Mount Holyoke separately from like right now, I will talk about it, and or any of the stuff we talked about, actually, like probably for way too long too.
What made you move to the West Coast? Because Mount Holyoke is on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn. Then I went to school to community college in Boston, and then Mount Holyoke, which is Western Massachusetts. And then I wanted to do first I wanted to do biology, and then I got into scuba diving, and I wanted to like be an explorer and all this stuff and explore the world. And so I only applied to like to graduate programs in places that I thought would be cool to live in. And I wanted to live in California, like Santa Barbara seemed like an awesome place to live. And there's amazing diving there at the Channel Islands. And so I wanted to travel and to see new places, and going to a graduate program in a new place seemed like a good way to do that. Also, there was my PhD advisor said that he had a research cruise and they'd be using submersible robots and a submarine, and I got to go on a submarine. So it's just cool opportunities, cool place, cool opportunities.
So one of the things that women struggle with is like being talked down to, or the concept of mansplaining. And that's definitely been a thing throughout all the fields, but especially in STEM fields. That's a pretty prevalent issue. Have you had any experiences of men talking down to you or explaining something that you already know? And how do you deal with that kind of thing?
I'd say, yeah, that definitely happens a lot. I used to, want to read like 10 papers on one topic and like know every single piece before I like meekly and timidly say, oh, I think that maybe this is this way. And then people would, barge in and be like, oh, this and this, I don't know, like, I think it's that way. It's probably that way. I didn't read anything, but I can tell you what's up. And as I go forward in my career, I sort of notice it more because I've become more confident, or I have, sort of acquired more knowledge on a certain topic. And so I feel more comfortable with it. And one topic that's come up a number of times for me is this DDT dump site. And so for my PhD, I studied this for 6 years. Along with a team of people, I wrote a paper and made these discoveries, and people have tried to explain to me about it. And I guess because it got a lot of attention, so people were talking about it, and they're like, hey, your work is kind of about this. I read about this dump site over there and they found this and that. I'm like, oh, did they? This mysterious they, please tell me more. What did they find? Fascinating. I do study something kind of like that. But I don't know. I try to just spend as little time as possible on people that I think are like hopeless or useless. And so excuse me, I have a phone call. Or I try with the humor, and to, if it's not worth my time to engage with them, if it's some random guy who, wants to explain it. And so in those cases, I just kind of, keep it short. And if it's someone that, I'm working with, or someone that is, part of a group or a department or a, community that I belong to, then I'll just be sort of more gently explaining that, or mentioning, yeah, I got that study, where I spent my PhD on that. I think it's exciting that, you're interested in this. And I think that it is important that people are interested in, this topic, this DDT site or something like that. So I guess it depends who is chatting about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's interesting how you said that you used to like consume like all of the papers and knowledge on a topic before you make an assertion about it. And then men would just come in and be like, actually, I think this thing. And that would just pretty much overpower your voice, even though you had more research and background on it.
Yeah, that took me a long time to realize that was happening, because they'd say it so confidently. I'd assume, well, I read 10 papers. He must have read 20 papers. Where I studied this for, 2 or 3 years. He must have studied it more, where he must understand it better because he's so confident about it. And then I realized how that confidence can be so disconnected from the actual knowledge about a topic. And then I would just, now I just almost like check in with myself. I'm like, okay, what is this environment? What's the context for this conversation? And also kind of pragmatically, what do I hope to gain from this conversation or achieve from this, or why am I talking to this person? And then decide sort of based on that. But I don't let people sort of just make these assertions and make me sort of run off back to the library to read up. I'm like, wait, what makes you say that? Or what's that based on? Or what's a source for that? Or tell me more about this. What makes you say that, and sort of get at it and see if it's actually coming from, a solid place or something that could be maybe useful. Maybe I did miss something or not. And then we can sort of move on from it. So I feel like I've gotten better at that. But yeah, that took years. And I wish that I sort of saw that sooner. But I think as a society, like, I don't blame myself. I think that it's sort of a societal thing that's sort of put on a lot of people. Like, I think I'm hardly alone in, sort of behaving in that manner. And that's because it's sort of a societal or cultural thing to impose on certain people this, attitude of being very unsure.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's definitely just ingrained in society and the system and everything. So do you have any advice for women who are looking to follow a similar career path to you?
I think that it's hard to give advice because I feel that people sort of, I sort of figured out these steps and I, was able to do this. So I feel kind of silly. Like, of course, I think other people can also do that. And so I feel always like, who am I to give advice, I guess. But at the same time, when I was a student at the community college, graduate students came and gave talks and they're like, oh, this is what I study and I get paid. I get paid as a PhD student. I don't pay tuition. I make an income as a, graduate student researcher. And that sort of blew my mind. I was like, oh, you can do that. And so I think that, I don't know. I think the advice I would give is to try to connect with people, whether it's going to a talk that someone's giving, even if the research sounds kind of boring, just to sort of connect with them. We can't love every piece of research out there, but to try to connect with people and talk to them and ask, like, how did you get into this? Do you know of any opportunities? I've talked to a lot of students and helped them email people that they want to work with or apply for internships. And so I think the advice would be to try to apply and assume maybe I can get this. Maybe this person will talk to me. Maybe I can get this internship. Maybe it'll be worth it to check out this opportunity or that one. Of course, those opportunities have to be out there. People have to be, and so I think that it's difficult. And so I think that it's not on the student to figure out how to get into the career. It's on people in the career to figure out how to engage with students. And so I'd say, like, cut yourself a break too. But if something comes along, to try to connect with those either individuals or a program or a professor, or to ask a professor if they know another professor, and to follow up. Because people, you might I emailed my genetics professor and, she replied, but if she didn't, it wouldn't be because she didn't want to talk to me. It was because she was busy. So I guess some persistence and talking to professors and to talking to different individuals that are, a potential connection to this field of research. My genetics professor took me to an open house at a laboratory and they had an internship program there. And that was my first foray into research. And the internship was only for veterans, like armed forces, like soldiers, Navy. But I went to this open house just because I had never been in a research lab. So it's like, what's it look like? I'm not, eligible to go to this, but can I just tag along? And they let me tag along. And then the coordinator of that program was like, we actually have extra spots if you want to apply. And 3 people applied and all 3 people got jobs. And we all worked in chemistry labs. And that opened so many doors for us, but we weren't even going to go. Like, we're like, I don't know if I should go to this thing. It's not for me. It's, and so I think a lot of it is luck, and then a lot of it is jumping on these opportunities and persistence and, like, trying to connect with people.
Yeah, it's interesting how that like one little decision to go to that kind of changed a lot of things for you.
Oh, it changed everything. I worked at Dunkin' Donuts 5 a.m. to noon. I commuted. I had a heavy backpack, so I didn't want to go because I didn't want to ride the bus to this lab with my heavy backpack. And because I had this early 5 a.m. shift and afternoon classes. And my genetics professor drove me in her like personal car to this lab to actually go there. I'm still friends with her. I talk to her students, or I'm now friends with her. I talk to her students. But at the time, she's like, Veronika, you should really go. You'll get, everyone who goes gets extra credit or gets some, lab points or something like that. I don't remember. And so I was hesitant to go. And then I was like, okay, this is a $4,000 job that I could have to work in a lab and be taught how to be like a scientist. And so that's also, I think a lot of it is luck, because I feel like I did the work, but I also kind of got lucky too. And I hope to do that for other people now and to like pass on the favor. And I've worked with undergraduate students now as well.
Yeah. I like that you had that mentor to kind of like push you past your comfort zone a little bit. Cause like, I mean, would you have gone if she wasn't like, hey, you should go to this? Like, you should really go.
Yeah, I would not have gone at all. I wasn't even going to go, even when she pushed me. I was like, I don't know. She had to really put some effort into getting me to go. And so, I mean, I talked to her. She knew me because I would come to office hours and be like, I don't know how to do this. This class is too hard. I'm freaking out. I need help. I need extra help with these assignments. And so it's also like this idea like, oh, you're super smart and everything, like, and that's why it worked out. And it's like, no, she pushed me because she knew me from office hours and she knew I'd try hard. But then, yeah, now I have trained some of her students as the mentor. And I want to keep doing that. Like, I want to be a scientist who gets to work with students. But I think that, first of all, someone had to set that up, that open house. Then someone else had to get funding to pay those undergraduate students to work in the lab. Then an actual lab had to host them and train them. And then the professor at the community college had to, encourage strongly students to actually show up and attend. And so that's why, that's what I want to do, but that's also something that's not necessarily available to everyone. So I feel incredibly fortunate that I got that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really cool story about how it's like really interesting how that's evolved and for you. And yeah, I just really like that. So those are all the like questions about your field and everything that we have. So my last question for you is, what do you like to do for fun in your spare time?
For my spare time, I think there's two favorite things. One is walking with the puppy in the woods. He's so joyful, this dog. I got him, he's a COVID puppy. So he was a puppy when COVID started. He's actually like 80 pounds now, but I still think he's a puppy. And scuba diving, which I got into as an undergrad at Mount Holyoke at this undergraduate college I went to. And you can see giant Pacific octopus. And to me, that's just mind blowing. Like, you can just see them in the wild. Like, what are you doing today? No, I'm going to go 100 feet underwater and like go look at an octopus and cruise around down there. So when I have time, that's when I run off to go diving or in the woods.
I was just going to say thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on here. I think it's just, I don't know, it's just really great. I'm like really flattered and I don't know, just like excited to talk about everything. So yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Closing the Gap. If you like this show, subscribe on Spotify. You can also find us on Instagram at MV STEM-CTE, on Twitter at Mid-Valley STEM, and online at midvalleystem.org. Until next time, keep progressing.